güzel.
Hocam dikkat et. Başka şeye benzemez.
Çok kişi duymadı. Bir iki gülen gördüm. Başlangıçta böyle şey yapmıştık. Belki İngilizceden dolayı belki de artık konuşmak istedim.
Tabii anlaşılır bir şey.
Ama konuşmamın bir kısmını ayırdı yine Kürt meselesine.
Evet.
Eminim ona da söyleyecekleriniz vardır.
Yani yazımızda söylediklerimizden çıkarsın izleyici istersen hocam. Öyle direkt kimde o cesaret? Bizde o cesaret olsa.
Okay, I welcome you all. I'm very glad to chair the hottest issue of this conference, the Kurdish question. And we all agree, I guess, that nothing has burdened Turkey as a nation and as a state as much as the Kurdish issue. And surely we also all agree that we are at a sea change in Turkish politics regarding the Kurdish question. After Öcalan's call for PKK's disarmament, we see dramatic developments and crucial days with the withdrawal of armed militants or guerrillas. And another issue is, of course, the amending the Turkish constitution for the Kurdish question. These are the recent parts of the ongoing political process to resolve the Kurdish question, and we have two prominent guests, two scholars, important intellectuals here. I would like to greet first Mesut Yeğen. Mesut Yeğen is a faculty member at the Department of Sociology here. I'm glad to be his colleague at the ŞEHİR University. He received his BSc and MSc degrees in sociology from Middle East Technical University and PhD in sociology from the Essex University. He taught at the Department of Sociology of Anatolia University and the Department of Sociology of the Middle East Technical University. His research and publications have focused on Turkish nationalism, Kurdish question, and citizenship in Turkey, as you all know. Now the floor is Mesut Yeğen's.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, as the title of my presentation suggests, I'll basically speak about the AK Party's engagement with the Kurdish question. My presentation consists of three parts, basically. In the first part, I'll briefly examine how the Turkish state or the parties in power before AK Party engaged or coped with the Kurdish question. I think it's through such an examination that we can sort of, how should I say, specify the AK Party, or we can assess the specificity of the AK Party's engagement with the Kurdish question. In the second part, I'll examine the AK Party's engagement with the Kurdish question in the years between 2001 or 2002 and 2012. I'll basically, my basic argument here is that the AK Party sort of oscillated between denial and recognition at the legal political realm, and between warfare and negotiation at the military or military political level. In the last part, I'll try to explain why the AK Party has now decided to pursue a relatively, let's say, firm politics of negotiation and recognition. Okay? Okay, I'll begin with the first part. Now the Turkish state coped with the Kurdish question by means of three basic instruments, I would say, or let's say the engagement of the Turkish state with the Kurdish question relied on three pillars: assimilation, repression, and containment, basically. That means the Turkish state basically assimilated Kurds, repressed them inside, and tried to contain them outside. Okay? And the resistance of Kurds, I would say, was not successful enough to produce any change in this politics of repression and assimilation inside. And the international climate, I would say, eased the success of the politics of containment outside, because, as you know, all the main actors of international politics up until 1990s, I mean, the UK, the USSR, and after 1952, NATO. All these basically helped Turkey, Iran, and Iraq to sort of, how should I say, be in cooperation to, in order to contain the Kurds in these three countries. Okay, so basically these were the main pillars, and the Kurds, let's say, strength, okay, was not big enough to challenge this politics of repression and assimilation inside and containment outside. And I would say that this lasted up until 1990s. Okay? In 1990s, things changed. Okay? That means the statu quo rested upon these three pillars started not to work anymore, starting from 1990s. Okay? Now, together with the 1990s, the Turkish state faced with a few important developments. The first important development in this regard was that despite the long-lasted politics of assimilation, there were still millions of non-assimilated Kurds, let's say, living in the southeast, basically, and this meant that the Kurds constituted, and still constitute, a majority in the southeast or in Turkish Kurdistan. The second important development was that Kurds' resistance to the assimilation and repression reached such a size and such a form that, I mean, in the 1990s, that maintaining the statu quo became harder. As you know, the PKK turned into a huge military organization in early 1990s, and it sort of launched a low-profile war against the Turkish state, and the pro-Kurdish party of the time received the support of almost one-third of Kurdish constituency in the free elections, okay, in 1991, I suppose. Okay? So that means the assimilation did not work, and the repression did not stop Kurds. Okay? The third important development, as you could guess, had to do with the international arena. There, with the collapse of the USSR, we know that, I mean, the Gulf War, I mean, took place due to the collapse of the USSR, and starting from 1991, we know that Kurds in Iraq, mandated by the USA basically, and today now they have their federal government. This means that, I mean, together with the 1991, the so-called politics of containment again, okay, started not to work. Okay. Now this means that the statu quo maintained by these three pillars, I mean by assimilation, repression, and containment, okay, was not maybe over, but was shaken. And this fact simply produced a kind of crack in the establishment in Turkey, while the classical elite of the republic intended to maintain the status quo by means of, let's say, employing the instruments which were used up until 1990s. Turgut Özal, wanted to change the way the Turkish state coped with the Kurdish question. He basically wanted to introduce a weak policy of recognition in order to be able to cope with the Kurdish question. Again, he had a kind of tension with the chief of staff of the time, because he basically wanted to provide a kind of mandate for the Iraqi Kurds after the Gulf War. Okay? So basically, Özal challenged almost all, or at least two of the pillars that I mentioned, okay, containment and assimilation. But the sudden death of him, of Özal in 1993, we know that stopped or prevented the deepening of the crack that I mentioned, and instead the classical elite sort of gained the power again, and we know that starting from 1993, the harshest politics ever, okay, began to be sort of followed in the southeast. That's say repression and plus assimilation. Okay, we know that thousands of citizens and soldiers and militants were killed during the clashes between 1993 and 1999, and millions of Kurds had to evacuate their homes or their villages. Okay, but this politics of this harsh politics of repression came to an end in 1999, and you know why? Öcalan was captured in 1999, and after he was captured, PKK withdrew. That's say PKK first declared a ceasefire and then withdrew from Turkey. But in 1999, another very important development took place. Turkey was accepted, eventually, as a candidate for EU membership, but Turkey was asked to introduce many reforms for the, how should I say, for the accession process, or for the negotiations to begin, okay? And Turkey first canceled the death penalty, and this spared the life of Öcalan, who was sentenced to death in 1999. And besides, Turkey introduced many reforms in 2002, made many constitutional amendments which sort of enabled, okay, to introduce some reforms concerning the ban on broadcasting and publishing in Kurdish. So that means in 1992, the Turkish state started to deal with, let's say, the Kurdish question with a kind of weak policy of recognition. At that time, it paused, let's say, the politics of repression, and the politics of containment was not working in 2002. So this was the ground where the AK Party started to deal with the Kurdish question, okay? So this is the end of the first section. Now I'll try to talk about how the AK Party coped with the Kurdish question between 2002 and 2012. Okay, a first-hand document revealing the AK Party's approach to the Kurdish question was the party program of 2001. Now, the program manifested that as of 2001, the AK Party put the issues related to enhancing popular sovereignty and administrative efficiency in front of the Kurdish question. It also indicated that AK Party wanted to leave politics of repression behind. And lastly, the program showed that AK Party wanted to develop the politics of weak recognition introduced by the former government. Now, this last fact was revealed, okay, by the fact that AK Party wanted to accept citizenship as the main point of reference for national identity. And again, in the program, AK Party sort of confessed that the economic development alone would not be enough to resolve the Kurdish question. So this was the first position of the AK Party. Yet, the deliberations and the acts of the first AK Party governments showed that the Kurdish question was not that much, let's say, important for the AK Party, or AK Party was not that much enthusiastic, let's say, to deepen the politics of recognition at that time. Okay? For instance, there was no single mention to the Kurdish question in the 58th and the 59th governments headed by Abdullah Gülen Erdogan. Okay? Now, this apathy to the Kurdish question continued, or the indifference, apathy, indifference, yeah, to the Kurdish question continued in the first few years of the AK Party government. I'm sure you all remember that once Erdogan, in a visit to Moscow, he was asked a question by a Kurdish worker working there, and he said, there's no such question as Kurdish question, something like that. Okay? And again, in an interview broadcasted in CNN Turk, he suggested that the question was basically an economic one, so if you sort of make people to live their lives, then you will see that, Kurdish question would sort of disappear. Okay, so these first few years sort of passed with a kind of apathy or indifference. I don't want to get into the details as to why there was this kind of an apathy, because the speakers in the first panel explained why, this tension between the sort of tutelage regime and the AK Party. But I think as important as this was the fact that, yes, PKK declared a ceasefire, and AK Party, how should I say, did afford, okay, to pay almost no attention. Under such conditions, AK Party did afford to pay no attention, okay, to the Kurdish question in these first years, okay? So these first years, yeah, passed with a kind of, I would say, conservatism with regard to the Kurdish question. But on the other hand, I should be fair, and I should admit that many important reforms were also introduced in these years. For instance, you know that as soon as AK Party came to power, just a month after a month passed, AK Party lifted the famous emergency rule in the southeast, and again it introduced some reforms concerning this ban on broadcasting and publishing in Kurdish. But on the other hand, let me try to draw the frontiers, or show the sort of specify the frontiers or the confines of this engagement with the Kurdish question. All these steps that I've just mentioned were already spelled out, okay, by the former government, 57th government of Bülent Ecevit. That means AK Party simply sort of introduced the reforms which were already, okay, put into the program, put into the national program of Turkey. You know, Turkey announced a national program for the EU accession, okay? So these steps were promised in this national program, okay? So that means, in these first years, AK Party did not go any further than the former government's politics of weak recognition plus no repression. And in the meantime, although the termination of the armed struggle in the southeast lessened, let's say, the importance of the Kurdish question in Turkish politics, some other signs indicated that this was a kind of temporary situation. For instance, in 2002, in the elections held in 2002, HADEP, the pro-Kurdish party of the time, received 6.2 of the national votes, and this, of course, indicated that the question was there, okay? And in fact, it did not take too long to realize that the question was there, because in May 2004, PKK ended the ceasefire and then resumed the armed struggle. Now, in this context, of course, AK Party started to spend some more energy for the resolution of the Kurdish question. And you know, in 2005, Erdogan went to Diyarbakir, and there he delivered a historical speech, and he said that, yes, he used the name Kurdish question there, and he conceded that the Turkish state had made some important mistakes in the past, so on and so forth, okay? But this 2005 speech is important because I think it was the most liberal, let's say, speech that has been ever given by a prime minister in Turkey throughout the Republican period, okay? Yet, this liberal speech was not followed by firm, let's say, steps up until 2007. it looks as if the AK Party changed its way of engagement with the Kurdish question after 2007. It is revealed today that in a National Security Council meeting in 2007, it was decided to get in touch with the PKK and introduce reforms concerning rights. In other words, the AK Party decided to follow a firmer politics of recognition and negotiation in 2007. However, it was only in 2009 that this change yielded its fruits. In this year, all the main actors involved in the Kurdish question started to sort of renew their positions. First, the Chief of Staff stated that the cultural rights could be recognized at a kind of individual level. That's to say, the army was ready to accept this kind of a change, okay? Recognition of cultural rights at an individual level. Likewise, Chief of Staff announced that they would rather sort of what? Undo the PKK, okay? Instead of terminating it. Yani o imha etmekten ziyade tasfiye etmeyi tercih ederiz. Türünden, he said something like this, okay? Liquidate. We would rather liquidate instead of terminating the PKK. In the same way, the AK Party government started to take some important steps of recognition. You know, TRT6 started to broadcast in Kurdish for 20 hours a day, and likewise, the Higher Education Board, YÖK, resolved to establish Kurdish language and literature departments in universities, and these were the most important reforms concerning the recognition of Kurdish rights, again, throughout the whole Republican era, okay? And this was followed by the PKK. That's why it did not take too long for the PKK to renew its position too. In an interview given in 2009, Murat Karayılan said that PKK was ready to engage in a dialogue with the final aim of disarmament. And meanwhile, the local elections were held in 2009, and this resulted with the absolute victory of the pro-Kurdish DTP in the southeast, okay? And immediately after the local elections, PKK announced a ceasefire in May 2009. And as you know, it was in this context that the famous Kurdish opening started. However, the demonstrations made at Habur, okay, by the Kurdish masses on the arrival of the PKK militants, okay, prompted a kind of national opposition to the process, and this resulted with the fact that the AK Party decided to slow down the opening process. However, the fact that the PKK did not end the ceasefire indicated that the opening process was still on, and as we know, the ceasefire and the negotiations lasted until the elections held in June 2011. Now, in the elections, both the AK Party and the DTP, or BDP, were quite successful, and I believe that this made both actors quite uncompromising. Okay? Now, as we all know, after the elections, I can try to explain as to why this kind of a change took place in the Q&A session, but after the elections, the clashes between the PKK and the army returned, while the PKK claimed that it would implement a kind of People's Revolutionary War, or Revolutionary People's War, with the final aim of defeating the state in the southeast. The AK Party people started to threaten the PKK that the Sri Lanka solution would be implemented. You know, in Sri Lanka, the Tamil guerrillas were defeated by the state, and the Turkish state threatened the PKK with the same policy. However, neither the PKK nor the government achieved their goals. The government in this process remained cautious enough not to sort of harass the civilians, and this produced the result that the PKK could not convince the civilians to get involved into the clashes between the PKK and the army. Okay? Yet on the other hand, the PKK sort of restored its credit, despite the fact that a kind of huge campaign of discrediting went on in these 1 or 2 years. Okay? Despite some heavy losses, the PKK achieved to recruit new militants. And likewise, despite the massive KCK, Koma Cevak and Kurdistan arrests and trials, the BDP sustained its credit among its constituency. Okay, this much for the second section. Now I'll finish with an assessment about the latest, let's say, process. I'll try to explain as to why the government has now decided to introduce a new politics. Now, in this context, the PKK and the state resumed the negotiations. But to my knowledge, it was not the context that I outlined above, okay, itself, that convinced the parties of the conflict that they should resume the negotiations. Rather, the routine of the context, as far as I see, was sustainable for both actors. But the developments abroad revealed that the routine that I described was likely to change. The crisis in Syria and the one in Iraq between the Kurdistan regional government and the Iran-supported Maliki regime produced a situation that could result with a fundamental shift in the leadership and the program of the PKK. As the crisis in Syria and Iraq deepened, it was realized that the PKK's loyalty to Öcalan's leadership and its loyalty to the principle of territorial integrity of Turkey could change. And I believe that this was in the interest of neither Öcalan, nor PKK, nor the Turkish state. Now I'll explain why I think so. Now the risk for Öcalan was obvious. If Öcalan were freed from the leadership of the PKK, he would be no one. The risk was no small for the PKK. A PKK, on the other hand, freed from the leadership of Öcalan, would ultimately face with the risk of portioning. Besides, abandoning the principle of loyalty to the territorial integrity of Turkey would very likely produce the risk of losing some of the mass support from Kurds in Turkey. Lastly, AK Party did not want to face with the results of a PKK freed from Öcalan's leadership and the principle of unity. But for the AK Party, there was another reason too. To resume the negotiations. Now it's known that the Prime Minister and the AK Party want to make some constitutional amendments that would empower the presidency and elect Erdogan as the new president. This means that in 2014, there will be at least 2 referendums, one regarding the constitutional amendments and one for the presidency. Now, I believe that if the negotiations with the PKK did not start, it was likely that the AK Party would be challenged by a political front composed of CHP, MHP, BDP, and very likely Gülen Cemaat as well. Okay? That the negotiations started has made the BDP a good ally for the prospective referendums, if of course the AK Party meets certain demands of BDP in the prospective constitutional amendments. So the ongoing peace process suggests that the AK Party now pursues a firm politics of negotiation, and that it's likely that it will pursue a politics of firm recognition in the coming years. So what we know at the moment is that, AK Party is now following a politics of recognition, politics of negotiation, and it appears that it will, or hopefully, it will pursue a politics of recognition as well in the coming years. This much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yeğen, for providing us with a big picture, with a useful framework, and an excellent summary of the historical development of the Kurdish question, and of course, with his opinions on the latest developments regarding the Kurdish question. Now we turn to Ahmet Yıldız. He will speak on the Kurdish Islamist conceptualization of the Kurdish question. Ahmet Yıldız was born in Diyarbakır and received his BA degree in political sciences and international relations from the Boğaziçi University. And he holds his MA and PhD degrees from Bilkent University in Ankara. Since 2006, he has been an associate professor in the field of political thought and political movements. Since 1992, he is working as an expert at the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, and since 2011, he was appointed as a chairman for research services at the same institution. Yes, the floor is yours, Ahmet Hocam.
Thank you. The topic, in fact, is very challenging for me. It's challenging because it is a clear test of the discussions, the debate going on in Turkey, whether the Islamism is dead or alive, because it shows a clear, crystal clear case of historicity of Islamism in Turkey in the form of Kurdish nationalism, creating a new articulation with nationalism in the Kurdish context. So the conceptualization of the Kurdish question by the Kurdish Islamists is really challenging and needs to be understood, I think. And to begin with, the concept itself, Kurdish Islamism, is an elusive concept. It is not easy to define it. If you understand Islamism as a specific understanding of Islam in a certain period of time, then this means that Islamism also intrinsically historical. Then it stands on the same plane as any other ideology. So you cannot equate, you cannot create any equation between Islam and Islamism. Kurdish Islamism, accordingly, refer to those Kurds who view Kurdish question as their central concern while keeping their ideological adherence to certain understanding of Islamism distanced from the Islamist current prevailing in Turkey. In other words, it refers to the Kurdishness of the members of Islamist organizations composed of only Kurds in terms of their cadres who place the Kurdish question into the center of their political involvement. Its basic assumption is the acceptance of the state of nationhood for Kurds and the requisites thereof. Imminent within this strand of thought is some sort of Kurdish Islamic synthesis. In this sense, we might say that Kurdish Islamists has a distinct place under the heading of Islamism in Turkey, or better, it represents a different strand of thought from the dominant form of Islamism in Turkey. In this case, traditional tariqats and other religious groupings, even if they have Kurdish origin or originated in Kurdistan, are to a great extent being left outside the scope of Kurdish Islamism because of their well-integrated fabric into the wider Turkey. The characteristic feature of Kurdish Islamism is to express a Kurdish or, better, Kurdic and Kurdistan-centered posture out of their Islamic identity and addressing essential people with Kurdish awareness. They propose the separation of Kurds from Turks, both in their mental and organizational networks, and hence dissociate themselves from Turkish Islamists for the emancipation of Kurds, recalling the rupture from the world capitalist system of the dependency school. The continuation of the mixed state with Turkish organizations for them may lead to the alienation of Kurdish Islamists to the cause of the liberation of Kurdish people, due to their inherent nationalism perpetuated under the guise of Islamism. The classification of Islamists in Turkey as Turkish and Kurdish is reasonably meaningful given their increasingly diverging comprehensions of the Kurdish question, deepened by the ongoing transformation of Islamist Kurds into Kurdish Islamists, and hence becoming, in a way, the Islamic wing of the Kurdish national movement. According to Kurdish Islamists, Kurdish question is not anymore an issue to be resolved through the assumption of political power by Islamists, in view of the fact that Islamism is an ideology of survival developed during the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire. The AK Party experience in government is also a case in point. The AK Party represents the conservative democrat vision of Turkish Islamism. The Islamism of Turks is both Turkish and statist. Kurdish Islamists are harshly critical of Turkish Islamists in their indifference to the Kurdish question, characterized by their imminent nationalism, and masked by the ostensibly Ummah-centered feelings of Islamic fraternity. Their question is, does the road of Ummah pass through Diyarbakir anyway? To them, Turkish Islamists, including the AK Party, have been unsuccessful in distancing themselves from nationalism and statism of the Turkic Kemalist formation, the fundamental systemic cause of the Kurdish plight. Since Kurdish Islamists' basic position is defined through their dissociation from the state and the state-hijacked Islamic fraternity, they are closer to the Kurdish nationalist groups, including the PKK-BDP line, than Turkish Islamists, including the AK Party government. Their priority is formed through what is Kurdish and Kurdistani, be it Islamic or not. Islam here is conceived as an intra- or inter-Kurdish issue. The AK Party experience in power and socio-political developments since the beginning of the 90s led the religious segment of the Kurdish people into new quests for a reformulation of the linkage between political power, Islam, and Kurds. This quest is structured on two reactive pillars. One, a state of alert against the policies suggested by the AK Party government regarding the solution of the so-called Kurdish question. And two, not only the AK Party government, but Turkish Islamists as a whole are not in a good position to resolve the issue due to their survivalist mental map. The question is, either you must divorce from Turkish statist Islamism or do not talk us about Islamic fraternity. Kurdish Islamists, despite their common denominators of being plainly Kurdish, have some differences, at least on discursive terms. While Hüdapar is an acronym for Hizbullah, literally means the party of God, Hüdapar also means Hizbullah. While Hüdapar Circle, that has an important mass following, reveals the position of a Kurdish Islamic synthesis, Azadi Initiative is essentially an intellectual formation. The Nubihar Circle, a fringe of the Nur movement, appears basically as a Kurdish culture group, as a Kurdish culture-oriented group, while the platform of Back to the Roots has a clear group identity and reveals a highly ideological mood. Thus, I will point mainly to the following formations as included within the cluster of Kurdish Islamism. I will not detail about them. Maybe we will have time for the questions. Hüdapar, Kurdish Hizbullah, the Free Cause Party, the platform of Back to the Roots, Öze Dönüş Platformu, Azadi Initiative, the Kurdistan Islamic Initiative for Right, Justice and Liberty, Hak, Adalet ve Hürriyet için Kürdistan İslami İnisiyatifi. Azadi means liberation or emancipation, dating back to the organization behind the Şehir incident. Okay. And Zehra Group, Nubihar Circle, in fact, a small fringe of the Nur movement in Turkey, and of course, the various independent thinkers and Kurdish meles or Kurdish mullahs. There are some other groups that are actively involved in the process of the Kurdish question, which are not limited to Kurdistan in terms of their scope of activities and hold a mixed, i.e. Kurdish-Turkish structure, like Özgür Der and Mazlum Der. I keep them outside the definition of Kurdish Islamism. Last but not least, Azadi Initiative prefers to be called Islamic instead of Islamist and Kurdish instead of Kurdist. This preference can be interpreted as the decreasing appeal of the term Islamism, although one may observe the debasement of this currency in recent times. This doesn't mean the death of Islamism as an identity, ideology, or political movement. Now, I come to the basic tenets and tendencies of Kurdish Islamists. The Kurdish question, according to Kurdish Islamist circles, caused by the lack of recognition of Kurds as a distinct national formation by the Republic, and perpetuated by the vicious cycle of uprisings against the nihilism of the state and the ensuing repression. Therefore, the fundamental cause of the Kurdish question is the lack of emancipation on the side of Kurds within their land, i.e. Kurdistan, from the yoke of Turkish nation state, perpetuated by the support delivered by Turkish Islamists. The appellation of the so-called Kurdish question is not a proper one according to them. The right appellation is the question of Kurdistan. The natural, quote-unquote, national rights of Kurds have been denied. The struggle launched against the removal of the subaltern state of Kurds will and does necessarily turn into a national one against the invading, assimilationist Turkish Kemalist nationalism. This struggle aims at equality, justice, and liberty for Kurds. Therefore, Kurdish national struggle cannot be compared to the nationalism of the oppressors, a Marxian discourse. Kurdistan is not a geographical term only. It must refer to the land of Kurdish people, i.e. it is the national home of all Kurds. Therefore, Kurdish question in its gist is the question of Kurdistan. The Kurdistani comprehension of the Kurdish question defines Kurdishness not only as an identity, but also as an ideology and national movement, which encompasses necessarily the right to national self-determination for Kurds. Muslims in Turkey either remained as spectators or indifferent to the suffering of the Kurds because they have been co-opted by the nationalism of the Turkish state. The perspective of Turkish Islamists on the Kurdish question has been shaped by the nationalistic worldview. Their way of the treatment of Kurdish identity has been one of the underlying causes of the present subaltern, humiliated position of Kurds in Turkey. Accordingly, while they behave against Kurds as their co-religious brothers, they categorically reject the Kurds' right to nationhood. The motto is, Muslims in Turkey are not Muslim on the Kurdish question. They approach the Kurdish question within the paradigm of the national survival syndrome that champions unity and solidarity without any recognition of ethno-religious pluralism. In their recognition of Kurdishness may pave the way for separators. They never acknowledge the Kurdishness as nationhood, neither in the context of human rights nor Islamic allegiance. The question of Kurd and Kurdistan is a question of national self-determination, azadi, liberation or emancipation of Kurds. In secular terms, this is sanctified by Islam as well. No one except Kurds has the right to decide on the issue. Accordingly, all alternatives of shared sovereignty are legitimate to discuss. Regional autonomy, territorialization of Turkey along autonomous regional administrations, federalism, independent Kurdistan, or even a pan-Kurdistan, i.e. democratic confederalism. The Turkish-Kurdish cleavage is basic to their comprehension of the Kurdish question. For Kurdish Islamists, the discursive subject is either Turk or Kurd. There is no other distinctions that may matter. In order to gain cognitive clarity and establish a plain Kurdish posture, non-involvement with Turks in organizational and intellectual terms is a must. This assertion is shared by all Kurdish Islamists, either verbally or de facto terms. The position of not only Turkish Islamists, but also traditional tariqats and religious groupings are seen as more pro-assimilationist. The members of these groups have treated Kurds as equal, which caused Kurds to be unaware of their identity, a process of hidden humiliation of Kurdish people. Good Kurds are non-Kurdish Kurds. Therefore, there is no ground to be together with them in political terms. They are quite vocal in dubbing the Ummah-based discourse of fraternity as a nationalist political language concealing assimilation of Kurdish existence. To them, the discourse of the Islamic fraternity is ended up with the negation of the state of nationhood for Kurds, while the prerequisite of this discourse must have been the establishment of the equality and justice inspired by the notion of equity. They raised objections to the use of the concept of Ummah, both on theoretical and procedural terms. Their notion of fraternity embraces all Kurds, including non-religious Kurds, striving for the national cause, i.e. partisans of PKK, BDP line. The Hüdapar position may be an exception here. They question the sincerity of Turkish Islamists in their activism for Palestine or Myanmar Muslims, while there are suffering Kurds in their very proximity. There is no contradiction between Islamic injunctions and Kurdish national demands, according to them. There can be no Islamic justification of delegitimizing Kurdish rights and their claim to sovereignty. The prominence of Islam is an issue that may follow the securing of Kurdish demands. Just as the Prophet Musa led the children of Israel to liberation from the dominance of the native Egyptians, the enslavement or subalternity of Kurds will be ended through the realization of Kurdish national demands championed by PKK, BDP, and supported by Kurdish Islamists. They support BDP, PKK not in their armed struggle, but in their endeavor for the recognition of Kurdish rights, and credit them for this because it is they who depicted the subaltern position of Kurds first, and because they suffered most in human cost. Despite their objection to the armed struggle, however, they have some sympathy towards it. Therefore, the scope of their fraternity encompasses non-religious Kurds who have contributed to the Kurdish cause. Nonetheless, the political position of BDP-PKK movement in the so-called settlement process is seen as compromising. Although it is a Kurdistani formation, the Hüdapar Circle doesn't share other Kurdish Islamist position regarding the rejection of involvement of non-Kurds in their organizations. They keep their Ummah-centered perspective, though with a special focus on Kurds, doesn't prioritize the formation of a Kurdish state as the preferred option for the political status of Kurds. Their motto is Islam for Kurdistan, yet they remain a sheer Kurdish organization in practice. Kurdish Islamist position in the settlement process swings between AK Party and PKK BDP line. They are suspicious of both sides, but it seems that they are more critical of AK Party than PKK BDP line. The so-called settlement process led by AK Party and PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan is seen as not final, but the starting phase of the liberation of Kurds. They say, yes, but not enough for the settlement process because AK Party is a huge angel run into the devil, and its adulators are little angels hijacked by the Satan. Roboski incident is seen as an indication of AK Party's imminent nationalist statist position vis-à-vis the Kurdish question. The settlement process is problematical because AK Party is not so successful in distancing itself from the official ideology. AK Party's charismatic leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan's political discourse is full of high and low tides. It shifted from the recognition of the Kurdish question to the question of my Kurdish brother. This creates a very serious concern in terms of his credibility. Against the rising nationalist concerns, the AK Party may turn to security-first policies and give up its democratic priorities. Any equation of the Kurdish question with the PKK question is problematical. In fact, one of the basic criticisms leveled against the so-called settlement process is that all partners of the Kurdish question need to be addressed, not only the nationalist, socialist Kurdish circles. The common point of all Kurdish Islamist formations is that the government must talk to PKK in order to end the political violence, but it must bring together all Kurdish formations for negotiations aiming at the resolution of the Kurdish question. Now I will briefly talk about the criticisms leveled against Kurdish Islamists. Kurdish Islamist political discourse is extremely ideological, polemical, and open even to racist considerations. It lacks a prudent reading of the practical constraints and exhibits an irrational idealism that may contribute only to the perpetuation of the conflict. They are generalizing in their criticism of the Turkish Islamist groups and give the impression as if they all have a state-centric nationalist view of the Kurdish question. This is misleading. The political position of Kurdish Islamists on the Kurdish issue is purely nationalistic. They cannot accommodate Islamic identity. Their discourse is perpetuating nationalist identity and therefore has a secularizing impact. The fact that the Kurdish people is an oppressed and weakened people, i.e. Mustazaf, doesn't confer legitimacy to the nationalist solution of the Kurdish question. The discourse of the Islamic fraternity cannot be condemned to a religious variant of the official assimilationist discourse. It might have possibly been used as such. This state of affair, however, doesn't decrease the value of Islamic fraternity for Muslims in providing the feeling of brotherhood going beyond national or nationalist boundaries. The political discourse adopted by Kurdish Islamists against non-Kurdish Muslim groups and opinion holders is insulting, divisive, and breaking the ties of brotherhood. The Kurdish Islamists suffer from the Stockholm Syndrome by applauding the secular socialist nationalist Kurdish movement represented by the PKK BDP line. Sorry, my time is up. Okay. Kurdish Islamists position themselves outside the legacy of Islamists in Turkey. Instead of rejecting the legacy of which they are a part, however, they must face with it and reckon on it. Muslims in Turkey as a whole is the victim of the Kemalist political system. The subordination of Kurds is an intrinsic part of this picture. Therefore, the claim that Muslims remained indifferent to the agonies of the Kurds are baseless. A Kurdish state solution is not what Muslims necessarily need for the solution of the so-called Kurdish question. The problems caused by the logic of a certain nation or nation-state cannot be remedied by the establishment of another one. Instead, this will lead to the re-emergence of the vicious circle of what nation-states lead to in terms of human pluralism and national self-identity. The Kurdification of the Kurdish question is different from the Kurdistanization of the issue. The first is linked to the communal existence cultural-wise, while the latter is related with politically defined territorialization of the communal existence. There is no necessary connection between being a nation in socio-cultural terms and a nation in politically defined territorial terms. In other words, the state of nationhood can be preserved without forging a necessary correlation with statehood. The present-day picture of the Kurdish Islamists is that they have become the Islamist wing of the Kurdish national movement, thus being articulated into the nationalist creed while losing their supranational Islamic perspective. Accordingly, the Kurdish and Kurdistan questions can be resolved in terms of cultural pluralism. In politically defined territorial terms, a sheer nationalist option, there is no solution either in ethical or political terms. I will stop here and wait for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmet, Yıldız, for this eye-opening and very informative speech and analysis of the nuanced thought of the Kurdish Islamist individuals and groups. Now, I guess we have about 10 minutes for questions and comments. I'll start with Burhanettin Duran.
I would like to ask Ahmet Yıldız a question about Kurdish Islamism. What I have learned from your presentation is that there is a tremendous, huge impact of secular nationalism represented by the PKK on Kurdish Islamism. So what's the reason for this such a huge impact?
One of the, basic factor of creating feeling of nationhood is the war or the bloody confrontations. The bloody confrontations start at 1984 up until now, created a Kurdish nation in Turkey. This national awareness perpetuated by untold stories, not of course had tremendous impact not only on Kurdish Muslims but Kurds as a whole. So the Kurdish masses became politically aware of their Kurdish national self-identity, and in a way, thanks to this bloody struggle, they rediscovered their Kurdish identity. So that's something normal.
At this stage, do you think that Kurdish nationalists are more nationalist than, Kurdish Islamists are more nationalist than Turkish Islamists?
In discursive terms, yes. Those who are, warring with each other are more pragmatic, They can cooperate and compromise on certain issues, but this, this ideological discourse is very harsh, uncompromising, and idealistic. So I think the discourse of Kurdish Islamists is much more nationalistic.
Yes, please.
Latif Yılmaz from Yıldız Technical University. Now, I want to ask a question to Mesut Yeğen about the pendulum of the Kurdish question in Turkey. So we know the Republican area, and before Just and Development Party's rule, that there were different pendulums and different discourse about Kurdish question. And after when we look at this period, we see again a pendulum. But I have a idea about this issue, and I want to share with you. I think there is an important issue in Turkey, in Islamism, in Turkish Islam, especially related on next generations. So about production of subjects, about production of next generation. So we know that from, for example, Gülen movement, golden generation. We know from Sezai Karakoç, Diriliş Nesli, or Revival maybe generations. From Necip Fazıl, we know Büyük Doğu Gençliği, or how can I say, Great East generation. So I think that there is a significant problem in this struggles on subjects. So when we look at this pendulum between government and or different groups today, for example, Gülen movement hesitation towards peace process, we see that there are some hesitations, and so these hesitations and also ruling parties' behavior towards the issue, do you think that is it really a easy issue to consolidate or to construct a consensus about who will produce next generations in Turkey's Kurdistan? So because I think it's a very critical problem. If if there don't occur a consensus on this issue, then all groups try to give a vision to this area, and so it will make very hard to construct a peace process, or they will struggle again on this issue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the tension between AK Party and the BDP, or between the AK Party and PKK, has something to do with this Kulturkampf, they say, cultural struggle. And it's true that, I mean, the BDP and PKK wants to sort of reproduce the existing, let's say, secular identity, whereas the AK Party wants to, I don't know, maybe produce a much more, pious generation. But I think AK Party, with regard to this issue, AK Party is much more pragmatic than the Gülen Cemaati. Gülen Cemaati's perspective is much more clear on this issue, and as far as I see, Gülen Cemaati is really upset nowadays due to its apparent, let's say, failure in Turkish Kurdistan, because though the investment that they made, in Turkish Kurdistan upon the Kurdish youth, it seems that they've been quite unsuccessful. And as far as I see, while the same is the case for the AK Party can tolerate this, due to its pragmatic nature, due to the fact that it's in power, etc., etc. But since Gülen Cemaati is a kind of, let's say, I don't know, civil society thing, it's more difficult for the Jamaat, to tolerate or to cope with this result. But in the future of Kurdistan, to be honest, I don't see any future for the Jamaat, because Jamaat usually works with the, the Turkish nationalists there, whereas the AK Party and the groups that Ahmet Yıldız mentioned have their sort of native, agents there. So basically, yeah, I don't see any future in northern Kurdistan for Jamaat.
Thank you. Engin Hoca.
I am just curious, what's the attitude of Kurdish Islamists towards Kurdish Alevis and vice versa? What's the perception of this movement by Alevi Kurds?
Historically, it is a fault line between, Kurdish Alevis and, let's say, Kurdish. Sunnis. We see it both in 1925 and 1937 incidents, you know. In fact, this is a matter to be solved, but under the common denominators of Kurdishness, they take it as a matter to be resolved between Kurds, you know. So it is not, it doesn't have a priority for them in the Kurdish national cause to be Alevi or Sunni. Kurds will, you know, tolerate their differences between themselves, and this is a question I think a little bit postponed. But in discursive terms, it will be, of course, resolved in pluralistic terms. They accept this, but we'll see.
Okay. Ahmet.
Hello, Ahmet Faruk Çeçen, Istanbul University. My question is for Ahmet Yıldız. I'd like to ask what you think about what might happen after this peace process, considering PKK is a Marxist-Leninist-based organization, and as we know, AKP and other Islamist Kurds think so different than PKK. Do you think that they will be able to get on well? And what do you think about, as I said, after this peace process? Thank you.
For Kurdish Islamists or general? I don't know if I understand correct your question. First of all, about the naming, it is not the peace process. In official terms, the peace can be between two legal parties, legally recognized parties. PKK party is not legally recognized. So it is the settlement process, not the peace process. I think they are pragmatic, and they will continue, you know, to assure a good result for both of them. You know, this is a kind of the end for both parties. They have to keep their position on peace, and to conclude at least the state of, you know, a non-armed civil space for negotiations. But the process we will see, I don't know.
Thank you. Ahmet.
Thanks for the presentations. I have a question to Professor Yeğen. So you keep referring a part of Turkey as Kurdistan, northern Kurdistan. Could you please define the borders? Which part of Turkey is Kurdistan? And if it's fine to use this word, can we define the other parts of Turkey as Turkistan? So if we keep referring to Turkistan and Kurdistan, do you think it will help the process?
Well, I don't know if it will help process or not, but to be honest, it's not my concern if I'm helping the process when I use the term Kurdistan. I'm using it as a kind of cultural term, not as a political term. I know that in political terms, Kurdistan does not exist, but I just want to contribute, you know, to sort of, I don't know, to a kind of climate within which we will get used to, you know, using the term Kurdistan. You know, I think you also need to get used to, okay, to hear the term Kurdistan when you come to such conferences, okay? I mean, what's wrong with using the term Kurdistan? There is the southern Kurdistan over there, and we know that, I mean, for ages, okay, people start to stop this process, and it's over there. And I think if you keep on thinking or behaving in this way, I think you will soon face with the result that, yeah, there's a kind of northern Kurdistan over there. Okay, can we stop?
thank you for this panel. When I was listening Menderes Çınar, he said AK Party or Turkish Islamists lost their stable other, which means Kemalism. And I think today both AKP or Turkish Islamists and Kurdish nationalists lost their own stable other. I'm using the other not in terms of identity, in terms of power relations. And what do you think how these two blocs will be able to mobilize their own followers without such a stable other?
Well, to be honest, I think in the coming few years, things will not change too much, okay? But after, I think, 2 years, once the process is settled, once the PKK is finally disarmed, new actors will join the process or will come to the scene, and I think those stable others will not continue to exist, especially in the northern Kurdistan, to use the term once more, okay? That means, I mean, as far as I see, some new actors are sort of trying to play their roles, but they are simply waiting for the disarmament process, okay? I know that there is a kind of very lively bourgeoisie there. There's a very lively sort of middle class Kurds waiting their sort of turn, okay, or waiting their turn to play their role. So once the process is settled, once the PKK is sort of disarmed, I'm very much sure that these stable others, okay, will not sort of reproduce themselves or will not be there anymore.
Okay. I guess we don't have time anymore. We may go on with the questions and comments during our coffee break. Thank you, Mesut, Yeğen. Thank you, Ahmet, Yıldız, and thank you for listening and attending.